Hello.
Hi, good evening, and welcome to the CASAA update for the week of 7/13/2015. Hi, Alex. You've had another busy week. We spoke too
Sort
soon
of.
last week. Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess almost as soon as we got off the uh, podcast, it was right back to work. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
well,
Busy.
I guess just to fill everybody, it feels like everything has slowed down. So I am, uh, by compared by comparison to the earlier part of the year, I'm a bit off my game. Um, so forgive me. Um, but yeah, as well, I guess this sort of came out at the end of the week. Um,
Right.
so, in case anybody in Massachusetts isn't already aware, there is a uh, hearing of the Joint Committee on Public Health tomorrow. It's Tuesday, July 14th at 1 p.m. And there is a pack of rabid bills that will destroy vaping as we know it. That might be overstating it a bit, but
Oh,
um,
I don't know. They look pretty bad.
yeah, this was one of those. I was trying before I came on. I was trying to figure out what this reminded me of. This was very reminiscent of Hawaii or Oregon
Yeah.
that had just a, a rash of bills attacking this from different angles.
hmm Which, I
So
mean, yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how they're doing it now. If we can't get you this way, we're going to get you that way. Or, hey, maybe this will work. And just, I'm, I'm so sad. This is really ridiculous.
The kind of shocking thing, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through each one of these bills. We have provided sort of a digest on our call to action, which will be linked in the notes to the podcast. So anybody that wants a little bit of, a breakdown, the Reader's Digest version of these bills, please check that out on our call to action. But I did want to bring up that unlike the other two states that I mentioned, we also have sort of a trio of not horrible bills, which is pretty good compared to what we've been seeing around the country this year.
Right.
Um, so probably the one of the most um, the in well they're not really listed in this order, but uh, the first one to really uh, make a point about is that HB 3466 we think could probably use a little bit of fleshing out to further define vapor products, and make a very clear distinction between vapor and smoking.
Right.
But this is one of those things that might fall under that clean minor ban descriptors. Um,
Right.
and so, obviously we're not opposed to that. In fact, I think we mentioned it in our pre-written letter as an example of a bill that we would generally be supportive of.
hmm
Um, and then, of course, very fitting to Massachusetts, HB 1951 would prohibit local boards of health from banning the sale of tobacco. So
Wow.
a little bit, well, not actually too late for Westminster, Massachusetts. But if people listening will remember, Westminster, Massachusetts was the little town in Massachusetts that tried to ban the sale of all tobacco products, I believe, including electronic cigarettes. And the members of the Board of Health got shouted out of their own meeting, and I believe had to be escorted out under what may have been armed guard. So, um, uh, it's almost kind of sad that Massachusetts has to pass a bill like this to prevent local boards of health from doing something so silly in the future. But welcome to Massachusetts, I guess. And then, of course, rounding out the pack of somewhat decent bills is HB 1943. And this is something that I think we will, going forward, would like to engage with the author of the bill and perhaps flesh out some of the language similar to the prohibiting sales to minors. But this is more, tobacco harm reduction is much like the rest of the tobacco discussion. This can be kind of a nuanced area. And so when people decide to make law about these things, even if you're just directing some sort of board of whatever to conduct studies, I think very specific things need to be said. And I think some expert oversight should be involved. I don't want to sign Carl up for a volunteer gig, but if I could think of it, one of half a dozen people that I'd like to have on some sort of advisory panel to help develop either the science or even the policy regarding some sort of tobacco harm reduction program at a state level. Carl would certainly be one of my first choices. So there's that. Again, Massachusetts has, what do we count them up here? 7 bills, I believe. 2 of them have companions in the Senate. So let's just call it 9 bills that are going to be heard in this committee hearing tomorrow. And it's only 7 o'clock on the East Coast. So if you're in the wonderful state of Massachusetts and you haven't already taken action, please do so now. And I lost the post. I saw that Greg Conley had posted something somewhere. I do believe he's flying in to testify at this hearing. And he had provided sort of a breakdown of each bill and some talking points for people to mention in their testimony. I don't know if you saw that. Did you catch that today?
You know what? No. Not today, actually. Believe it or not, I actually do a lot of prep work for this show. So when I come home on Mondays, I spend a lot of time doing that, but hang on. It's not like I don't follow Greg around, so let me see if I can find that link for you.
I believe you, by the way.
I might be able to, which would be a wonderful thing.
I was going to say, I believe you, by the way, and this would probably be another excellent time to throw in a little plug for the daily nicotine.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you read that is just pretty terrible. Yeah, it's not on Facebook, so maybe he put it on Twitter.
It was on Facebook. I don't know if it disappeared. Perhaps it was a little too revealing. But needless to say, there are some very specific notes for people to hit. And so anyway, if you're going to be testifying tomorrow, I would recommend getting together with Greg or I believe Chris Prost from Massachusetts Savada will be there. I hate to sign people up for stuff whether or not they're able to make these things, but I would just assume that he's going to be there. Anyway, those 2 folks should be in attendance, and I would look for them to double check and make sure that everybody's got their ducks in a row.
Right.
I don't know if Massachusetts broadcasts these things. A lot of state legislatures You can find the live hearing stuff online streaming. So this should be an interesting thing to listen in on or watch. Encourage everybody to check that out if you can Google it.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. I'm just saying that Massachusetts, and I think I've talked about this before. Massachusetts is particularly insane, mostly because so much, all of their governors have joined this sort of group that makes some sort of money from these things. And they join together. They also have, the universities up there make quite a lot of money from anti-smoking research. So it's kind of in their interests to jump on the anti-everything bandwagon because there's a lot of money in it for them. And you can tell just by the plethora of bills that they've tried to pass this year, and there have been a ton of them. It's a scarily determined sort of place. Yeah. That's pretty much all I was going to say. Sorry.
No, thanks for the insight.
Yeah.
Not to leave, leaving Massachusetts, not a moment too soon, on to Pennsylvania. We received word last week, and this is actually more of sort of a common sense follow-up, something that we will likely put together this week for California, but we have a call to action out for Pennsylvania. This is an update to our governor's budget, 40% wholesale tax call to action. Because of the efforts of some dedicated state level advocates and some other people, and of course everyone who participated in our call to action, which by the way, this bears repeating, we released this call to action back in March, mid-March, and almost overnight, 1,000 people in Pennsylvania were added to our roster. So kudos to Pennsylvania. I used to live in Pennsylvania, so just thanks, guys. That's that warms my heart a little bit. And we actually have just slightly more advocates on our list in Pennsylvania than we do in California. So we'll get to California, but just to drive that point home a little bit more too. But our call to action right now is to send a very simple and polite and concise thank you letter to members of the Pennsylvania State Assembly. And of course, as always, we are encouraging people to include, sort of a paragraph version of your personal story. And we've sort of heard this theme that going forward, this is really important to put out there, that what lawmakers in a lot of places are really interested in hearing from consumers is how these products have actually benefited you. I think have heard over and over again from the other side about how we're just anecdotes, and if this really was a product that was helping people, then this is something that Senator Leno in California was fond of saying, is that if these products are really helping people quit, then why don't these e-cig companies go through FDA medical approval and get approved as a cessation product? But in reality, there are lawmakers out there who do understand that real world experience happens. Not all of this stuff is proved in a lab, and that thousands, if not potentially millions of people are going to experience the benefits of these products. So it really is important for you to just break your personal story down into 3 sentences and include it in all of these letters that we put out. And so that's, our letter to Pennsylvania right now is 3 paragraphs long. So just, slide your personal story in there, personalize it, and tell Pennsylvania lawmakers just how beneficial switching to smoke-free products like electronic cigarettes and snus, have helped you quit smoking and change your life for the better. And especially in Pennsylvania, where they were working to enact a tax on smokeless tobacco, it is important for them to hear stories about smokeless tobacco helping people quit smoking.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, even if you don't vape, this call to action is for you, because the smokeless folks were dodged a bullet on this one, as well.
Yep.
So that's Pennsylvania. All right, the coffee's kicking in, so I'm like liable to get a bit wordy as we continue.
That's okay.
Sorry, Julie. So I guess rounding out the pack this week is California. When did this happen? Last Wednesday, the Committee on Governmental Organization met and heard testimony from proponents of the bill and a large group of opponents from the vaping community and the vaping industry. And for now, and there is emphasis on the for now, this bill is not going anywhere. And I would like to stress that this is not dead. It's just not going anywhere right now. And there was sort of a late comment towards the end of the week. In the midst of all of the celebrating that this had gotten beaten back, someone had sort of quietly posted up that they had gotten word that SB 140 was coming back. So really, this is just a warning that just because it doesn't make it through this particular committee hearing, there are still plenty of lawmakers in California that can pick up this ball and run with it.
Well, I mean, and they can also just completely gut any bill they want and insert that language in there, correct?
Yeah, actually, we saw something like this last year. I forget the bill numbers. I seem to remember it was something about vending machines, selling electronic cigarettes in vending machines, and I can't remember exactly how it worked, but the bill ended up getting completely gutted, stripped of all of the bad language, but for a brief moment there, it had some definitional issues where vapor products were tobacco products, and it was something that was sort of slid in at the last minute. I'm not entirely certain if that's an accurate account, but yeah,
I think I remember that. Yeah. What do they call it? A pump and dump, or a gutting and a. Yeah, it's I think it's like called a gut and stuff, where they completely gut the wording of the language out of one bill and stick the wording of the language from another bill into it with the old bill number and try to pass it. I mean, that seems like something California would be all over.
Yeah, anybody who aggressively wants to get this legislation passed would absolutely, I wouldn't put it past them to do this. Look for this to rear its ugly head once again. I found it kind of interesting that at the end of the day, this bill, I think, would have increased some of the restrictions on sales to minors, or made it a little bit more difficult to sell to minors, something like that. There were still some things that were left in the bill that I just kind of feel that if you're genuinely trying to make some decent public policy, then, I just don't see cutting and running. The parts of the bill that were stripped out by this amendment didn't completely destroy the bill. Right. So it just sort of, we watched Senator Leno argue with Stefan Didak, back and forth about, no, the bill doesn't do this. Oh, no, it's not about that. We're just trying to protect the children. And it's kind of funny that, the most egregious parts of the bill were taken out. It still would have, ostensibly protected the children. Right. But it's, he lost the parts that we had the biggest issue with, or at least one of the parts, and just sort of threw his hands up and walked away. So.
Yeah, but that's not, when it's ALA language or anything like that, that's not a new strategy. We've seen it before.
Yeah.
That's just what they do. The American Lung Association wants this stuff gone. The ALA, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, we've seen, you and I have seen their legislation, and it's patently horrible. Yeah. And once all the stuff that they think is really important is stripped out, they just throw up their hands and walk away, which I don't know what it gains them. It makes them look like hypocrites. It really makes them look terrible. Yeah,
and there's some other stuff going around. It's just sort of a tangent that I'm about to go down here, but I feel like I've seen, at least the past few days, there are, speaking of people looking silly, the propylene glycol found in antifreeze talking point is starting to come back again.
But it's found in pet safe antifreeze. If you don't want your pet to die and you have a leaky radiator, that's the antifreeze you use. But PG's used in ice cream, for God's sake, frozen dinners. It's in your child's nasal drops. It's in your eye drops. We bathe in it. We're marinated in it. It's in everything. We can't freaking avoid it.
Yeah. So I don't. I guess they're just sort of preying on the weak-minded, weak-willed at this point. And it's just to kind of, I guess, to dovetail a bit on the alphabet groups, this sort of this deeply ingrained hypocrisy that we see in the policymaking phase is also, I don't know how much of this is attributable to them, but there are some other people that seem to be arriving at this party a bit late. Some of these folks are really just producing some clickbait and whatnot. But I feel like I've seen this from a couple of policymakers recently. The old,
excuses.
No, the old like scare tactic talking points that we saw this time last year, or over the past 2 or 3 years, have started to come back.
Well, but the rest of their scare tactic stuff isn't working. So they go back to promoting chemophobia. Yeah. Promote a fear of chemicals, because everyone's afraid of chemicals because everybody's on that all natural kick, right? But even natural stuff's made of chemicals, right?
Yeah. It's ultimately modified too. So, yeah. I guess we're just doomed. I can't even just reduce myself to a diet of cardboard because that, was probably produced unethically by whatever. So,
but it is, these are talking points though that we see throughout society. You know what I mean? Natural is better. And in some cases, that's true. You shouldn't ingest extra chemicals. And for some people, that's probably true. But you can't really go around avoiding them. They're there. They're in the air you breathe. They're in the air you exhale. We exhale formaldehyde, for God's sake, on a regular basis, just by breathing. You can't avoid formaldehyde if you're exhaling it. You make it. You know what I mean? So I a lot of the scare tactics that we see are just like you said, they're preying on and it's not weak-minded, but I think it's preying on the uneducated. And I know in the beginning, not just CASAA, but other groups I was involved with, we went through a lot of research and we went through a lot of the science ourselves to try to prove to vapors that this stuff wasn't hurting them. And I think we successfully proved it, and we successfully shut down a lot of these scare tactic talking points, and yet they're back again. So that tells me if you're seeing it in like a cracked.com video and you're also seeing it from politicians, that there's government money behind that. I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if you look at the amount of money that the CDC has to pump into anti-tobacco advertising, you would see why a lot of these stories are coming to the forefront again. I mean, you can just make a connection if you just follow the money.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, I was actually going to. I'm trying to find a way to make it not such an abrupt shift in the topic, but I feel like I've certainly run the course on the state level legislation for now. So, but speaking of science, it's worth mentioning again that we are currently looking to the community for donations to our research fund, so that we can fund a study that will go towards disproving the gateway effect of using low-risk, smoke-free products like vapor products. And we're looking to raise $7,500, which is not a lot of money.
Right.
And I believe we'll probably be promoting this a bit more as we go forward this week, but just for now, at every opportunity, should be worth mentioning. I don't think I did produce a bit.ly link for this. We'll throw it in the notes.
Okay.
Oh, and I forgot to give sort of a federal update, because this is a bit, it's a bit slightly beyond me. We are still, of course, asking people to send letters urging your U.S. Congress people to not just support but co-sponsor H.R. 2058, which would effectively change the grandfather date in the FDA's deeming regulations to allow for newly deemed products, including vapor products, to stay on the market without the burdensome prohibitive pre-market approval application. But at the same time, this week we saw an amendment pass in the House Appropriations, I guess it was the full Appropriations Committee. It is was it an agriculture appropriations bill? And there was a paragraph in there that I guess it doesn't, did it defund the FDA's ability to
regulate,
to set this grandfather date? Yeah, without money, I guess they can't enforce this particular bit of the deeming regulations. But that amendment passed, and no, sorry, there was an amendment to strike that out. That amendment was defeated, so the language was left in, and I believe the bill has passed through committee. There's still several steps before this, becomes law, but it is progress. So we're, again, just because this one thing passed doesn't mean that we stop supporting this other thing. So for the time being, please continue to participate in our call to action for HR 2058 and take some bit of solace in knowing that there are lawmakers who are approaching this from another angle as well. So things are starting to look kind of encouraging. I don't want to give out too much hope, But that's that.
Yeah. Well, I hear somebody's driving the ambulance.
That's a daily thing through here. I live in New Jersey.
Yeah, I used to when I grew up on the farm. It was really a nice farm, and I probably shouldn't talk about this on the CASAA podcast, but eventually the state came through and seized a few acres of our land. And the front of my house was on a 4-lane highway. So I grew up listening to ambulances and cops' cars and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of jarring. But I still find that sound is soothing and reminds me of my childhood in a weird way. So,
yeah, I live in the most densely populated city in the country, so it's just all right outside my front door.
Yeah. Well, I think things aren't as bad as we think they are. The state level legislation is horrible, and it's hard to get people to do stuff when you would like them to. But I think people generally care, and I think that makes a big difference. So every victory, no matter how small, is gigantic, and we should celebrate the hell out of it.
Yeah, celebrate, not gloat. But yeah, I agree to some extent. Hopefully good things happening at the federal level translate to more awareness at the state and local level. Obviously, we've had hundreds of communities, hundreds of municipalities throughout the country adopt bad vaping regulations. And I actually went as far as to respond to somebody in an email this weekend. I referred to it as vapor control. If we're going to have tobacco control, we might as well start calling it vapor control, which is just an absurd notion. So let's call it what it is.
That's hilarious. I like it.
Yeah. So so the vapor control folks have been out in full force at the local level, and fingers crossed that once the feds finally come over to our side, which is that of truth and science, that the local folks will start to change their course, and hopefully some good words at higher levels will embolden people, some of the local advocates, to take the issue back up with their local folks and amend some of their local ordinances, and we can start rolling things back to a more reasonable bit of regulation, if any at all.
Yeah, I agree. Here. I'd like to thank you for coming on tonight, Alex, and I also want to thank you for everything you do for CASAA and for the community. If you've not already joined CASAA, please go to CASAA.org and join us. You can also join the conversation on Facebook on the We Are CASAA page or the CASAA.org page. We are CASAA Media on Twitter, on Instagram, and I think on Google+. So come on down and talk to us. We want to hear from you. Have a good night. And if you haven't already, share your testimonials with the CASAA Testimonials Project. That's also still a very important thing that I haven't really pimped in a while, but I needed to. So come on down, talk to us, share your stories with us. We love to hear from you. Have a good night, and thank you for coming on with us again this week, Alex.
Thanks. See you next week.
See you next week.